Welcome to Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we are going to discuss the Spanish-American War. What we are actually going to do, however, with regards to the Spanish-American War is discuss just the bones of the conflict. There's just too much here. And I only want to give a 10-15-minute discussion. So the Spanish-American War is going to be an 1898 war. It's going to be very short and very popular in the United States. As a little bit of a preface to this war, however, in 1868 to 1878, the Cubans rose up in an independence movement against Spain. Spain still had Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, three in particular, as colonies, and so they rose up in an independence movement. They were brutally defeated in this independence movement, and in 1878, many of them began to have to go into exile, the movement, or else they were killed. The same time that this is going on, and especially right afterwards, after 1878, they began to trade increasingly with the United States. That means economically, they're leaning towards the United States sphere and away from that of Spain. This is going to be especially important. Okay, so 1878 then, some people refused to accept defeat and fomented a new uprising, such as this guy, Jose Marti, who becomes the father of the independence movement in Cuba. I don't know why I was going to say Brazil, but in Cuba. And this is, he's not just important for the father of independence movement. He is going to be a famous writer. He's going to live much of his life in exile in New York. And so you get a big view by reading his writing as to how Cubans felt the United States saw the Cubans. And oftentimes he was right. It's very interesting to read some of his work, right? He is a nationalist, an excellent nationalist in this case. Well, some people like Jose Marti are going to die in another uprising that begins in 1895. So 1895 then, a new independence movement takes place. And after 3 years of fighting an independence movement, then the United States is going to join in, right? Don't forget, they're now increasingly in the U.S. economic camp. Okay, this war is going to be popular in the United States, but during the wars, especially after 1895, the United States makes it popular because they are fighting what's called yellow journalism. Yellow journalism is the newspapers that oftentimes make up stuff, or else they exaggerate the evil nature of the other side in order to sell more newspapers, right? So yellow journalism is one of those sad parts. William Randolph Hearst, as you can see right here, sad parts of American journalist history here. Here is a great image, right? It's supposed to tug at American heartstrings, right? Spaniards search women on American steamers, drawn by the famous Remington, right? So women are being searched as being rebels, and you can see here that this violates what Americans at the time, the late 19th century, felt should occur. It didn't occur like this, but, it's yellow journalism. I'm sure people were searched, so it's not like they made it completely up, but they were not searched like this, so they exaggerated the truth by far. Well, after the Mexican-American War, DuBois Commercial Review stated this: "The North Americans will spread out far beyond their present bounds. They will encroach again and again upon their neighbors. New territories will be planted, declare their independence, and be annexed. We have New Mexico and California. We will have Old Mexico and Cuba." So during this 1895 movement, we kept saying to Spain, hey, listen, we think that you should give Cuba independence. It's what should happen. It's democracy. It's this and that. And Cuba said, and Spain said, no, 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 no. You just want to take Cuba as part of the United States. And we said, no, we don't. Yes, you do. Right? See, you've said it over and over, and you've repeatedly offered to buy it from us. Well, we told them that we have no interest in annexing Cuba. In fact, that's going to be known in history as the Teller Amendment. we have no interest in annexing Cuba. As such, it's going to be very hard to go back on our word, so we're not going to be able to do so. Therefore, the United States, after 3 years of this independence movement, decides we want to join in order to protect our interests, economic interests, and to increase more economic interests. Now, on the left of this slide, you see the USS Maine. We send the USS Maine, well, the right too, but the USS Maine in to Havana Harbor to monitor the situation. Imagine if two people are fighting and you just said, I'm just going to sit and watch you guys. You can't watch for very long before you take sides. This is inevitable. Well, somehow the USS Maine blew up. My theory about this, which some people still disagree with, but I think is right, is that this is a steamship and it is in the harbor. The steam will build up to such an extent that if you don't release some of it, it will explode. And it's exploded. It blew up, right? Recently, people have gone down and discovered that the explosion came from the steam engine. That doesn't mean somebody didn't somehow blow it up, I guess. You could use conspiracy all you want. But anyway, 1898, the USS Maine blows up, and that's going to be our excuse to go to war. It's still going to take a month, but we're going to use this as our excuse. Remember the Maine. Here is the yellow journalism explosion piece. Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo. Probably neither one of those, but that's all right. It did explode, for sure. So we declare war on Spain. It's the Spanish-American War. Here's a good piece of advice. If you're ever going to go to war against somebody, try to beat the pants off them before they realize you're really at war. And that's what we do. Before an era of cell phones and everything, before the Navy, the Spanish Navy, which was in Manila Bay, knew what was going on, we sailed in there and we blew them to smithereens. So the Battle of Manila Bay by Dewey is going to be one-sided. The United States is going to defeat the Spanish Navy. The Filipinos say, holy cow, that's wonderful, yay, you've liberated us. And we say, no, we didn't. We did not liberate you. We defeated the Spanish and now you're an American colony. And the Filipinos said, we don't want to become an American colony. Well, too bad. And now we begin another war here against the Filipinos that is even more bloody to try to get the Philippines as part of the Americas. Eventually, we're going to say, fine, you can be independent eventually. We will let you have your independence in the 1930s, but as you may have heard, the 1930s is going to lead to the conquest of the Philippines by the Japanese, right? So they don't get their independence until after World War II, but they're now an independent country. All right, so the Philippines then. Here's a point what became, as a result of the Spanish-American War, an American colony. Cuba is the next theater of operations here. The most famous of all the soldiers is going to be Theodore Roosevelt. He was Secretary of Navy. Now he resigns. He makes himself famous as leading the Rough Riders up San Juan Hill to defeat the Spanish. Well, they forget to include all of the other American soldiers that assisted, but this propels him into the White House, and he's going to become the vice president, and then when the president dies, he becomes the president of the United States as a result. So this is going to be Teddy Roosevelt's war. The Philippines, as you saw, becomes American territory, and Puerto Rico. Not a whole lot of war fighting went on in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's fighting was relatively small. Cuba's was much bigger than Puerto Rico, and the Philippines was much bigger than Cuba's. Nonetheless, we defeat the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. America has the right to intervene in Cuban affairs in order to ensure peace and protect the property of Americans. When we defeat them, we force the Cubans to write a constitution. Now, we say, because of the Teller Amendment, that we're not going to take Cuba as part of the United States, not our colony. Philippines, we didn't say that, so it's our colony. Puerto Rico, we didn't say that, so it's technically it's not a colony. It became a territory, a commonwealth, and now it's part. It's not a state yet. It's still a territory, I believe, but it's not yet a state. Anyway, so we issue a Platt Amendment. We tack this on to the end of the Constitution to say, hey, if ever the Cubans, whenever we feel like the peace and property of America is being threatened in Cuba, then we're going to send in the U.S. Marines. And it's in your Constitution saying that we can. So it's going to be in effect until 1934. 1934 is one of those years that a dictator has come about. The reality is that 1934 is an important date because that's the middle of the Great Depression. FDR is a new president. Congress said we can't keep sending funds to send the military to these overseas operations. The American public were concerned that we're spending so much money on the army when the economy is terrible in the Great Depression. So FDR established a new policy, the good neighbor policy. We're going to be good neighbors to our Latin American neighbors from now on. Okay, so far this has been the barest of bones of the Spanish-American War, but here are the results. The United States wrested the Philippine Islands, Cuba, and Puerto Rico from Spain. No longer are they part of Spain, no more colonies. Puerto Rico was annexed. It was part of the United States. But again, as I said, it has not become a state yet. Cuba was made a protectorate thanks to the Platt Amendment, and it would remain a protectorate until 1934. The Philippines descended into guerrilla warfare. This has been one of the most violent wars that America has fought until, you could argue, one way or the other, that it was the most violent until the Vietnam conflict, but we simply didn't have television cameras in the Philippines. So the Americans have the right to intervene whenever we feel it's necessary. So in 1906 to 1909, for example, we occupy Cuba. In 1917, it's a short occupation, but we still occupy Cuba. So the two amendments that are important for the history of the Spanish-American War are the Teller Amendment and the Platt Amendment. This war was popular in the United States. Why? Because it was 7 months. Very popular. A short war. And two, because we won. We won this war. President Theodore Roosevelt is going to call it a splendid little war. It's a good description. It was little. It did not involve a lot of American casualties. And of course, it was a war. Now, this is going to result in two camps in the United States. One is the Anti-Imperialist League. What are we doing? We cannot begin an empire. Well, too bad, says the other side. We have an empire, and it is our duty to spread American style, remember the Manifest Destiny? Democracy and Protestant-style Christianity throughout the world. And you see missionary work going all over the place, democracy being a type of religious fervor being spread all over. It's important. Guantanamo Bay, however, is something I should mention because it's always in the news recently. Is part of Cuba. Even later, it's going to still remain American territory. So even though Cuba does not remain American territory, this portion of Cuba does remain American territory. Now, if we look at this, now this is not a very good slide, but it still works. If you look at it, the United States occupied from 1899 to 1902, but then they had their own president until 1906, but then we came in and occupied it again. We can do that because of the Platt Amendment, right? Then Cuba rules themselves, although with frequent interventions, say in 1917 by the United States. But then from 1934 to 1940, there is going to be a president, Fulgencio Batista, who even when he's not the president, he is in charge. A dictatorship, right? And that is the dictator, when he leaves and then comes back again, that is going to be ousted by none other than Fidel Castro in the Cuban Revolution. So hopefully that brings it all together. Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. That was, in bare bones, the Spanish-American War.